Oh, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you again, Bob. I appreciate it. There's my dad back there. Always good speaking in front of your dad. Well, I'm thankful and humbled to be back here to share in this experience, not only congratulating all of you, but to share some of my story, and specifically a few of the pivotal moments on my journey that left a lasting impression with me and shaped who I am. So like many of you, my journey started here at Williston, where I made lifelong friends, grew academically and athletically, where the mission and core values built a foundation that has been part of my life and career, living with purpose, passion, and integrity, a focus on responsibility, community, and collaboration. For me, these aren't empty words, just some saying on a wall. These are the core elements of who I am in my professional journey and success. So how did I, a kid from Pittsfield, come to run the nation's continuity programs? Well, some of it's through happenstance, relationships, and dedication. After undergrad, I moved to Washington, D.C. I had no job. I found roommates on Craigslist, if you know what that is, strangers, lived with 5 strangers. Every day I would get up, put on a suit, go around the city to law firms and nonprofits, handing out my very thin resume. On one particular morning, my roommate, who happened to be a Senate staffer, mentioned that Senator Ted Kennedy of Massachusetts was looking for a special assistant and offered to walk a copy of my resume over to the senator's office. The same day, I got a call from Kennedy's office to come in for an interview. There were 7 interviews for this role as special assistant. My second to last interview was with Victoria Reggie Kennedy, now Ambassador Kennedy, the senator's wife. Vicki Kennedy's important to note that her brother went to Williston and her father had served on the board. So you better believe that I knew that and that I worked that into that Williston connection into the conversation and interview, and it made all the difference. I was hired. Working for Senator Kennedy was incredible. It was also extremely intimidating and demanding. His staff was comprised of the best in their respective fields, and I didn't know anything. At least I certainly felt that way. The senator had very high expectations, regardless of your position. The amount of memos, letters, draft policy papers that came back redlined with redo or see me written at the top was often frustrating. He demanded the best of us. He also inspired us to be better, to grow, and made a deliberate point to ensure each member of the team knew exactly why they were performing an assignment and how it fit into a larger strategy. The senator always said, the details matter. And if you arrived to a briefing not having done your homework, not knowing the answer, he would send you away and say to come back when you're ready. This may seem a bit much, but being prepared matters. Details matter. Quality matters. And it made all of us better writers, communicators, and critical thinkers. And I carry on that practice with my own staff today. As special assistant to the senator, I did everything. My day began at his home very early in the morning. I briefed him on the events of the day, any pressing matters, had the news clips prepared, and his relevant materials. And then we were off. Constituent meetings, policy sessions, lunch with members, calls, union meetings, votes, an evening speaking event or a fundraiser, then back to his house for dinner, and then evenings in his library late, reviewing memos and making calls. I would also get home very late. I prepared for the next day and did it all over again. When I first started, I made a lot of mistakes. I didn't know the answers to his questions, forgot things, so he would get frustrated. On one particular day, And I've never told this story in public. Some have heard it privately. But one particular day, we arrived to the Senate for a hearing with then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. I had forgot his notes at the House, so we were off to a good start. And he walked as he walked to the Senate building, I received 2 phone calls for the senator, minor things. But I got out of the car and I ran over to the senator to let him know, and saw that he was looking over my shoulder. And I said, "Do you hear me?" And he responded, "Oh yes, I hear you, but you better go take care of that," gesturing behind me. And as I turn and sort of everything slows down, I see the car we had arrived in rolling through the parking lot, hitting every car along the way. In my haste, I hadn't put it in park. To say it was not great would be an incredible understatement. In my early 20s, you imagine making that call home. Say, "Well, how was the day?" Say, "Well, Dad, I crashed the senator's car, and then all the papers carried it, and Kennedy car goes careening, driverless minivan." It was not great. Every career, no matter how carefully built, includes moments when things don't go as planned. However, it is not the mistakes that define you, it's how you respond to them. I didn't get fired that day or the next, and I paid for the damages. And a week later, the senator told me a story that his father had told him. And I'm paraphrasing, but his father had told him when he was young that he could have any life that he wanted. He could have a serious life with purpose, or a life that simply goes along, but that he needed to choose. The senator said to me, "Michael, I need to rely on you. And if this isn't for you, we'll find something else. But you need to decide. You have to choose what type of life you want." Even just starting out, that was a tough conversation. I felt like I let the senator, my family, and myself down. And I thought through it, and I made my choice. And I gave all of myself to that role. I made myself indispensable. We became very close, and to this day I remain close with the family. And with what little free time I had, I spent it learning, taking courses on federal budget process, appropriations law, parliamentary procedure, acquisitions, grants, etc. I went on to become advisor and then deputy director for economic development. And yes, I made mistakes along the way, but I always adjusted and I learned from them. And I could fill days with Kennedy stories about campaigning, bipartisan dinner parties at his home, or being a small part of the push for the Affordable Care Act, the Patient Bill of Rights, prescription drugs, immigration reform, support for unions, teachers, military body armor. But beyond everything I learned on policy development and coalition building, what stays with me are the conversations, lectures, and lessons on taking the long view, the importance of compromise, relationships, being prepared, and the value and weight of giving and keeping your word. During challenging moments, he would pull the team together and say, "This is why we're here, to do the hard things. We do them because they're right, because they're hard." When the senator passed away, that was difficult for me, for all of us. And I was faced with another choice. And I needed a change, and I wanted a new sense of purpose. So after several months off of forced time off, we call that unemployment, I received a call from a former colleague who recommended I go meet with the new administrator of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And at that time, the agency did not have a great reputation. However, I had heard good things about the administrator, Craig Fugate, and that he was driving trains. And Craig Fugate was a real piece of work, and he and I are still very close from this day. He's a big 6'2" guy from Gainesville, Florida, no nonsense, very direct and very linearly focused on the mission. So we met, and Craig looked like he had walked out of the back warehouse of Home Depot, and there I was, looking like me, typical DC bureaucrat, and we sat down across from each other in awkward silence for 1 minute until I asked, "How may I be of help?" He responded with, "Why do you want to work here? You don't know anything about emergency management." And I said, "You're right, I don't. But I can learn, and you need help navigating DC, Congress, and the White House, and I can help you with that." I also said, "I want to be of service. I want to be somewhere that I can make a difference." So we chatted for a bit, and the more we spoke, I knew I had to work for this person. So we struck a deal that day, and within the first 2 weeks on the job, I was off to school at the Emergency Management Institute in Maryland, learning incident command system, crisis management. And he took great pleasure in what he called the great re-education of Mr. George, ensuring that I knew response operations, risk modeling, diverse multi-mode communication systems, and supply chain management. At FEMA, first as advisor and then years later as deputy chief of staff, we pushed hard to reform every aspect of the agency, transforming programs, changing the culture. Fugate's commitment to the mission and the team were components of his leadership and embodied many things that I had hoped to embody in my service. Empathy and compassion for those we serve and those whom we serve with. Integrity and forthrightness to do the right thing and to ensure that the right thing is done to completion. Accountability and the humility and self-sacrifice to know that the mission and the people we serve are at the end of the day the most important thing. I cannot count the number of times Craig counseled and advised me on the principles above. I learned more from those talks than any book or training on leadership. We were in Joplin, Missouri in 2011 for the response to the EF5 tornado. The devastation was unreal. And any of you who've ever seen tornado damage, it's unlike anything else. Everything was leveled, and I had never seen destruction like that. As we stood in the debris field, I was overwhelmed. I said, "Where do we even start?" And Craig replied, "Michael, for these people, their whole world right now is as far as they can see and as far as they can walk. Our job is to help them pick up the pieces and take their first step to what will be a long recovery." Where do we start? We start with compassion, and then we go from there. With FEMA, I traveled to 46 states and territories, crisscrossing the country, meeting with local officials, community members, public safety personnel, governors, other state leadership, listening, surveying, identifying problems, developing solutions with the community that fit the community. The also Washington mudslide, more Oklahoma tornadoes, Superstorm Sandy, hurricanes and flooding year after year, the Boston Marathon bombing, and the Fukushima nuclear incident after the 2011 earthquake and tsunami. In these moments where things can be chaotic, right? Disasters are chaotic. Craig would say to me and the team, "Remember, we are not the ones in crisis. Stop, breathe, and work the problem." These experiences changed my life. We were in the White House Situation Room late one night receiving an intelligence briefing on the Fukushima meltdown. The room was filled with department heads, the national security advisor, subject matter experts, and I watched as technical information being presented was lost on the intended audience. And the administrator, in his typical, very direct fashion, leaned in, and he explained to the president and all those in the room in plain and clear language the problem, the implications, and what it meant for our support to Japan and the impacts to the United States. It blew me away watching this. Later I asked him, I said, how do you know so much about nuclear power plants and radiation? Craig responded, Michael, I make it my business to know. It is my job to understand the risks and impacts from all types of threats and hazards, and is critical to shaping how we respond. What's the lesson? Do your homework. Be prepared. Know your audience and communicate clearly. I never walk into a meeting now without knowing the subject matter, the intended audience, and asking, what are we missing? So in 2021, I had the honor of being appointed to the position of Associate Administrator for the Office of National Continuity Programs, an office charged with ensuring the preservation of government and its leaders, often working behind the scenes, doing all that conspiracy shadow government stuff. My father, who's here, his friends asked him, he said, what does your son do? And he said, I don't really know. But I work with these dedicated professionals whose career, who work tirelessly behind the scenes for their mission. My career to that point had been to provide support to others, behind the scenes. Stepping out in front into the leadership role was daunting. Everyone's now looking to you. What if I fail? What if I let everyone down? Putting ourselves into new situations is how you learn and discover new things about yourself. And I knew inside, and you will too, when you're ready, even if it can be anxiety-inducing. So taking what I learned from two dynamic leaders and other mentors and drawing on my experiences, I moved forward. And then Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. That was a very tense time. Days were filled with intelligence briefings, meetings with National Security Council, the Department of Defense, State Department. There was tremendous concern in the early weeks and months of the invasion. Would NATO engage? What was the possibility of European nations, particularly Eastern Europe, joining the conflict? Would the United States? Would involvement directly or indirectly escalate the conflict? Our role was to rapidly prepare elements of the government and critical assets in the event that Russia retaliated, whether that was cyber attacks or conventional weapons, it didn't matter. It's a lot of pressure. And when the pressure would build, I'd go for walks outside, I'd visit with the team, I'd make small talk. I found it grounding and a helpful distraction. And then I would remember what Craig taught me, to pause, to breathe, and work the problem. And when people turn to you, all you can do is trust your team and yourself, give the best advice or direction in that moment with the information you have and nothing more, and you keep moving forward, which is what my office and my team continue to do today. Now, in the interest of time, because I could tell stories all day, and if you see me after, I'm happy to share ones that are probably more appropriate, not on camera. I'm going to leave you with some final thoughts on service to reflect on. When President Jimmy Carter created FEMA in 1979, he established an agency founded on the principles of service and responsibility. Service is more about just fulfilling a job. It is a profound sense of duty and a dedication to helping those in need. It is about putting the public first, ensuring that every action we take is centered on the well-being and resilience of our government structures and the communities we serve. This sentiment, in my opinion, captures the alignment of mission and values. And as you move into this next phase of your academic journey and eventually into your professional lives, regardless of what that may be, you will be entrusted with responsibilities. often great responsibilities. And it is our duty, it is your duty, to carry those out faithfully with dedication, remembering always to align your values around purpose, passion, and integrity. Also, you can crash a senator's car and it'll be okay. I don't recommend it. Listen, everyone, I wish you all the best, and I have no doubt that you're going to achieve even greater successes in the future. Thank you and congratulations.